G'day, humans. Welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. Here's an uncomfortable question for you. What do you make of this whole quest to go and colonize Mars, and the rich boys with their toys like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos with their spaceships? Is it just a big distraction? Or could we be on the brink of a reinvigorated era of space adventure? Will NASA ever get itself together? It has a new administrator that President Trump has appointed, still needs to be cleared by the Senate, but this guy is very different from any NASA boss who has come before him. And there is now a real plan, an actual plan, to go back to the moon. It's partly motivated by the fact that China intends to send human beings to the surface of the moon by 2030, and America, once again, is being spurred into action for geopolitical reasons, if not scientific ones. I wanted to speak to the person in the world who probably knows more about space technology, the space race, the geopolitics of it, and NASA and all of these guys than anybody else. He's the editor-at-large of Time magazine in the United States. He's the author of 13 books, including Lost Moon, The Perilous Voyage of Apollo 13, which is the book on which the movie Apollo 13 was based. His new book is Gemini, Stepping Stone to the Moon, The Untold Story. And I wanted to understand not only what is going on in MAGA land between Trump and Elon and the new administrator of NASA, what their intentions are, whether anything will happen, but also the future of space exploration and how it fits into the history of humankind, the tension between our desire to conquer and our desire to make things right here at home. The conversation starts a little wonky and scientific, so it tickles my nerd bone, but it then expands to the point of exploring space at all. I hope you enjoy as much as I did the one and only Jeffrey Kluger. When I was in university in the 2000s, the first decade, I was a card-carrying, paid-up member of something called the Mars Society, which I think was a non-profit to lobby for humans to go to Mars, because I thought I just had a sense that, like, when my parents were in college, we went to the moon. Now that I'm in college, we should go to Mars. When my kids are in college, there'll be, interplanetary, bases on Mars and things, and we'll be shuttling back and forth. Well, we're 10 years away from my kids going to college.
Right.
What the hell happened, Jeffrey?
Well, I think what the hell happened was you can trace a lot of it back to Richard Nixon. We landed on the moon in 1969, just 8 years after we had the first pop gun suborbital flight. We went from a 15-minute flight to the surface of the Sea of Tranquility in 8 years. That was astonishing. But as soon as that happened, a lot of the air went out of America's enthusiasm for space. The big issue, the big question, the big challenge was to get there first and beat the Soviets. Well, we got there first and beat the Soviets, and people, even something as dramatic as a moon landing, people habituate to familiar things very quickly. And, Apollo 12 went to the moon. Apollo 13, obviously, that was a different story. And everybody paid, exceedingly close attention again to the effort to bring the crew back. But Apollos 14, 15, 16, 17, in the popular mind, those ran together. Richard Nixon was in the White House from 69 to 74. So he spanned the lunar landing era. And he saw that public attention was fading. There was a lot of talk that he still was rankled by his loss to John Kennedy in 1960, and the Moon Initiative was a Kennedy program. So Nixon wanted a Nixon program. So midway through the moon landings, he made it clear that there would be no White House support, and if he could help it, no money coming for, further lunar exploration. And we were instead going to confine ourselves to dog paddling in low Earth orbit. And this gave rise to the shuttle program. Now, the shuttles were remarkable machines. They were deadly machines. 2 out of 5, 40% of them, were destroyed and killed their entire complement of crew in both disasters. but they were
Wait, is that
still
true? How? Just put some flesh on the bones of that statistic for me. I think we all remember the Challenger disaster. I mean, don't remember. We're aware of the legacy of the Challenger disaster in the
right.
80s. 40% of all space shuttle missions were fatal?
Well, 40% of the fleet was destroyed. Remember, there were 135 space shuttle missions, so no, 40% of them weren't fatal, but there were 5 shuttles, and 2 of
Oh, I
them
see.
were
Right.
destroyed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. In
So
terms of the devices that are being used rather than the occasions on which they were used.
exactly, yeah, no,
Yeah.
the occasions on which they were used, 133 out of 135 missions were successes. Unfortunately, the
Right.
2 failures claimed their entire crew.
Right. So it's like an airline where 40% of the planes eventually blow up in the air, but the airline can say, "Yeah, but we ran thousands of flights before they blew up and it was
Exactly,
perfectly
yeah.
safe."
Yeah, so and you wouldn't fly that airline if
No.
40% of their planes were blown up. Um, so once the enthusiasm drained out of lunar exploration, and once there was a president in the White House who wasn't terribly interested in deep space exploration, it was sort of inevitable that we were going to confine ourselves to low Earth orbit. Now, I remember reading, it was either Time or Newsweek, when Apollo 11 happened, and there was a column about what's next in space, and their prediction was we would be on the surface of Mars sometime between 1979 and 1984. Well, that was 40, 50 years ago, and we are still not on the surface of Mars. We want to get back to the moon. The administration talks about 2027 for boot prints on the moon again.
Let me just pause, Jeffrey, before we get to today, because there was an interesting sort of. I'm curious about this era as well, the earlier era. Can a case be made just to sort of bend over backwards and be as generous as possible to Nixon and his administration, which is something I didn't think I would find myself doing in this chat.
Exactly.
Could a case be made that we had to massively overreach from what was practical in the Kennedy administration in order to win this symbolic victory in the Cold War, but actually the financial and scientific utility of the program, once that political win had been achieved, was not great enough to justify a continued investment, and that, I find it astonishing that in the 2020s we have made no further progress on exploring the moon or Mars. But I don't think that it's necessarily the wrong call that in the 1970s, the US was like, we can pause this. We did a lot. Let's just take a breather. Wait until the next generation of technology comes along. Wait until there's a scientific reason or a geopolitical reason. And then maybe in the 80s, or something, let's go back. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, the space program certainly was expensive. Back in the 60s, NASA's budget represented 4% of the entire federal budget, which is a huge number. Today, it's 0.4%. So, in terms of its share of the national budget, it's 1/10 of what it was in the 1960s. Now, you're talking about 1960s dollars, so you have to correct for inflation. But nonetheless,
you don't if it's just a proportion, though.
If it's just a proportion, that's true.
So 4%, so 1/25th, is that of the entire budget?
Of the entire federal budget,
yeah, or something like that. So, I mean, some countries spend that on their entire defense.
Right.
Budget.
And the U.S. spends about, a third to a half of its budget on defense, and another quarter is spent on servicing the national debt. So, the optional, what am I looking for? What's
marginal?
No, not marginal. The elective, not elective.
Oh,
either.
I see what you mean. I know what you mean. The portion of the budget that is discretionary.
Discretionary, that's the word we're looking for. The discretionary budget is only about a quarter of the total. The rest is mandatory entitlements and interest on the debt and defense. So, the share of the budget out of which NASA's budget can come, is already pretty constricted. So, yes, it was very expensive in terms of the scientific dividends. Those dividends are paid in terms of learning about the formation of the moon, which tells us something about tells us something about the formation of the Earth, which tells us something about the formation of the solar system as a whole. That is not without value. That's very important information. But it is academic. It is clinical. Once you know that, what can you do with it? Well, you can't
Also, I mean,
monetize it.
isn't it done by the time you get to Apollo 16? I mean, how much more
Well, I
examination
mean,
of the Sea of Tranquility do you need?
Well, they were, remember, they landed in 6 different spots, and those spots got progressively trickier, progressively hillier. The Sea of Tranquility and the Ocean of Storms, where we landed the first 2 times, are as calm and placid and flat as they sound. Well, Ocean of Storms doesn't sound very placid, I guess, but they were both pretty level places. When Apollo 13 flew, it was targeting the From or Ojai lands, which were hillier. Apollo 14 ultimately went there, and Apollos 15, 16, and 17 investigated mountainous regions. So we were getting different kinds of geology. We were exploring different kinds of sites. So it wasn't really done. By the time we
Okay.
got back from Apollo 11, and there's still new places to explore. We've never been out of the equatorial region of the moon. The U.S. and China are both targeting the south lunar pole at this point because it's a different kind of area and because there is water ice there that, in theory, could be harvested by future moon bases to provide potable water, oxygen, and rocket fuel in the form of liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So you could do a lot with the ice deposits in the south lunar pole.
This is probably a stupid question, but I guess I'd never really thought about it. The moon has cold poles and a warm equator like the Earth does, or is that an
Well,
artifact of the Earth's atmosphere
it's
in part?
partially an artifact of the Earth's atmosphere. The reason the poles are so cold is that the light comes in laterally. And if there's a crater with a lip on it, the light will be blocked, and that crater will be in permanent shadow. The surface of the moon is blindingly lit half of the month and completely black the other half of the month. A lunar day is the same as a lunar month. Or a lunar year if its orbit around the Earth is a measure
Because
of
the face is always facing out
the same
the
face is always
Earth.
facing right.
Yeah.
So you get these permanently shadowed regions in the poles, which are colder than the surface of the moon, with the surface of the moon. And yes, if you are directly in sunlight in the moon on the moon, it will be very hot. The surface of your suit would be very hot. So yeah, it is colder in the poles, but it's due to the shadowed regions.
Got it. Okay, so we get to sort of today. I mean, I remember the only other time that I heard Mars come up in a formal political context was, I think, when, correct me if I'm wrong, George W. Bush had a brain fart at a State of the Union, I vaguely
Yes.
remember, and said, like, he announced that America was going to Mars, I think,
Well,
or was it the moon?
but no, both Bushes did that. George H.W. Bush I think it was 1989, in his first full year in the White House, announced an initiative to get to Mars. And then the Office of Management and Budget crunched the numbers, and they said it would cost $500 billion to do it. So that
He's like,
idea,
actually, you know how I said
yeah,
that thing?
yeah, let's put a pin in that and come back to it later. So,
Yeah.
once they put a $500 billion price tag on it, it wasn't going to happen. George W. Bush in 2004, in the run up to the 2004 election, did announce a new moon initiative with an ultimate goal of getting onto Mars. Now, a lot of people said that was just election year candy, give people something to get excited about and not really follow through on it. But in fact, it was budgeted, it was in the NASA budget. And for about 5 years, 6 years, there was a very robust program at NASA called the Constellation Program to get back to the moon as early as 2015, which seemed like a realistic goal when this was first announced in 2004, and ultimately go on to Mars. The the program was never funded sufficiently, so there was a lot of important follow-on work that wasn't getting done. And when Barack Obama took office, rather than supplementing that funding to allow the program to be more viable than it was, he simply pulled the plug on it. And, so the Constellation program, after 6 years of work, was abandoned. So yes, both Bush presidencies, had very dreamy views of, where we were going in space, but neither one of them came to fruition.
Right. So the first Bush, Daddy Bush, predates my political awareness, but
Right.
Baby Bush, I remember thinking that was probably the first election that I paid attention to, except for my brain being pinged by some craziness in 2000 that I didn't quite understand, obviously.
Yeah.
But that was the first time that I remember there being my realizing that what American presidents said didn't mean that it was actually going to happen,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
That because I thought that, and coming from a parliamentary democracy, usually the party in power can pretty much figure out how to get what it wants to get done. And I knew that JFK had talked about, before the end of the decade, and then it happened, and so I thought, well, that's great. So America will go back to the moon and then Mars. So I'll just wait. I can forget about this for a few years and then it'll happen at some point. And then I sort of, found myself like trying all the doorknobs in the room of my brain where where this thing was located and going, what was it about that thing? What happened to that? So did Constellation, should we blame Obama for pulling the pin on Constellation, or should we blame NASA for not having got its shit together better with Constellation in the first 5 years, or should we blame Congress in the Bush administration for not funding it properly in the first place, or all of those?
I hate to say it, but I think the blame goes to Obama. The fact that NASA was behind its schedule and missing its deadlines was partly due to the fact that the program wasn't funded robustly enough. Now, that actually isn't Obama's fault. That's Congress's fault. Back in the summer, Donald Trump proposed a budget for NASA that would include about a 24% cut, which is huge. NASA's, overall budget is only $24 billion, which is a rounding error in a $3.5 trillion economy. And Trump proposed to cut it further. That's not going to happen because presidents can only propose budgetary expenditures and budgetary cuts, and it's up to Congress actually to write the checks or not to write the checks. In this case, it is space-heavy states like Florida, California, Texas. Their lawmakers in Congress are pushing back and making sure the funding continues. So there wasn't sufficient funding for Constellation. Obama could have lobbied to increase it and let the program really thrive, since it was already, sort of 2/3 of the way to its goal. But instead, he pulled the plug, which is very typical. One of the things that distinguishes the U.S. space program from, say, the Chinese space program is every 4 or 8 years we change administrations. And just like Richard Nixon pulled the plug on Apollo in order to put his imprimatur on the space program, Obama did the same thing, pulling the plug on Constellation. China, on the other hand, has 5-year plans and 10-year plans, and they are quietly working toward a moon landing in 2030. And while they have not launched many impressive missions, they certainly haven't gone circumlunar. They haven't even flown in Earth orbit with crews all that often. I think they've had 4 crewed flights to low Earth orbit. When they say in 2015, we're going to do this by 2030, well, the same government is going to be in power in 2030 that was in power in 2015, as opposed to the U.S., which could have changed hands 4 times.
Right.
In that. So,
look, at the risk of making American listeners believe that the only way to get continuity of public service between governments is by having a communist Marxist dictatorship, it is also the case in many parliamentary democracies that the public service has a greater independence and continuity between governments, and that there's more of a standoffish, hands-off, I should say, approach from incoming administrations to very expensive projects that were commissioned and that are kind of running on behind the scenes. But let's not get political, because the China question brings us to what I really want to talk to you about, which is today.
Right.
Are we going? I guess all of this has been a circuitous way of saying, like, given my traumatizing experience of having believed in Mars in college and then thinking that a US president was actually going to do it, are we going to the moon again?
Yes, I strongly believe we're going to the moon again. As early as February, Artemis 2 is going to fly circumlunar. It will whip around the far side of the moon and come home. It will not even orbit the moon. It certainly won't land. It basically will replicate Apollo 13's trajectory, but with a healthy spacecraft. In 1972, the fraternity of men who went to the moon, the fraternity of human beings who went to the moon, stopped increasing. In 1972, after Apollo 17 came back, there were 24 men who had either orbited, flown around, or walked on the surface of the moon. We are now down to 3 of them, 4 of them. 5 of them. I'm sorry, 4 moonwalkers plus Fred Hayes.
Depends when we release this episode,
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Exactly. Yeah, there are 5 out of 24 who are still alive. As early as February, we are going to add 4 names to that list, and one of them will be the first woman to visit the lunar neighborhood, and one of them will be the first person of color to visit the lunar neighborhood, and one of them will be the first Canadian, a member of the Commonwealth, to visit the lunar neighborhood. So that is going to happen as early as February and as late as maybe April or May. But there is a huge distance to be covered between flying circumlunar and landing on the surface of the moon. The U.S. doesn't even have a lunar lander yet, and SpaceX, which was given the contract to build the lunar lander, is badly bungling the job, and a couple of other companies are now scrambling to fill in. The acting administrator of NASA, a man named Sean Duffy, who is also the Secretary of Transportation, announced a couple of weeks ago that NASA's contract with SpaceX to build the lunar lander is going to be scrapped, and he's going to open up the bidding to other companies trying to build a lander. The Trump administration says they want to have the lander built and have us on the surface of surface of the moon by 2027. That is absolutely not going to happen. Most realistic people say at the absolute drop dead earliest, it'll be 2030. Well, that's when the Chinese plan to go. So, we are in a real foot race with China. And in order to win it, we have to build the machine that's going to land on the moon. We haven't even started that yet.
And that is basically the imperative now. What makes now different from the previous gestures towards the possibility of going with another space adventure is the fact that we don't want China to do it before we do it again?
Well, that is it. I mean, the administration talks about China a lot. Sean Duffy talks about China a lot. The new administrator of NASA, Jared Isaacman, who was just renominated yesterday, he's very mindful of the competition with China. Trump is very mindful of the competition with China. And look, this worked with the U.S. and the Soviet Union in the 1960s. We had to beat the Russians to the moon because we had to demonstrate to the world that an open capitalist economy was superior in terms of innovation and invention and technology to an autocratic communist system. We won that race, and I think people are trying to plug China into the same formula and get the same kind of competitive energy going. I'm not sure that's going to happen because the fear factor isn't there. Back in the 60s, we were afraid of the Soviet Union. We were afraid of Soviet missiles. We were afraid of the threat of nuclear annihilation, and beating the Soviets to the moon was one symbolic way of saying we are the stronger, better, fitter country, and in a nuclear war, we would prevail. We're not a nuclear standoff with China the way we were with the Soviets in the 60s.
That's right. I mean, it also strikes me that there's another salient difference, Jeffrey, which is just that there was something ridiculously audacious about it in the
Right.
60s. It was
Yeah.
like, you know what? It was a competitive battle for like who has the civilizational model that will stand astride the cosmos. You know, it was like this very sort of 1950s sort of optimistic can do. Like, what if we could do something so batshit crazy as to land a person on the moon? You know, like that would make us top dog. Whereas
Right.
now it's like, all right, the Chinese are going to do it, so we should go back and do the same thing that we did over half a century ago, so they don't get a little bit more glory than we do. I mean, you know, it's almost
Yeah.
like the
It's
equivalent now is AI or something. Like, who gets to build the super intelligence? You know, that's
right.
where people's energy is
Right.
at.
Who gets to
But
build the machine that's actually going to achieve consciousness?
yeah, exactly, and kill us all.
Right.
Jeffrey, so you said the problem is that we don't have a machine to deposit people onto the moon and bring them back. We're only going to slingshot them in this
Right.
upcoming Artemis 2. But you had that machine a half a century ago. What's the problem with today's machines that
Well,
that machine didn't have?
First of all, we can't decide what kind of machine we want. Elon Musk's SpaceX is planning to use a 150-foot tall upper stage of a Starship rocket, which is 5 times taller than the lunar module was. You ask a very good question because we built it once. We could build a 21st century version of a mid 20th century spacecraft with all of the hardware and all of the computer power, and contemporary materials and contemporary manufacturing techniques. We could build that, and Lockheed Martin and Blue Origin are both quietly competing with SpaceX to do just that, to build a new lander based on the old model of a low-slung four-legged machine with a deeply low center of gravity, and 2 stages, landing on the moon and then leaving the bottom stage on the moon and using that stage as a launch platform to blast the crew back off. You ask a very good question. Why can't we just reinvent the wheel for the 21st century? And the answer is we can. And there are, at least 2 companies that are trying to do that now.
Right. Okay. I'm only saying if the imperative is just like do it as quickly as we possibly can just to prove that we can still do shit and the Chinese
Right.
can't, obviously there might be other reasons to want to do it better than we did it last time. So these designs that are very different, Jeffrey, you mentioned the SpaceX design, this unwieldy sort of almost like, what is it, the Jefferson? What's in Washington? The giant penis in Washington?
The giant penis, the Washington Monument. Yeah.
The Washington Monument. It's like almost looks like that, doesn't it? I mean, like,
Right.
and it sort of lands up straight and
Land
stuff.
straight
And
up and erect on the surface. Yeah.
and it has some terrible problem with fuel, with how to fuel it.
Yes, and that is a huge problem. In order to get that spacecraft to the moon and give it sufficient fuel, it has to park in low Earth orbit, and then tanker spacecraft have to fly up and refuel it. The thinking is Elon Musk, the best he will predict is that it will take as few as 8 to 10 flights to fill that spacecraft. Other people, more skeptical, less credulous, say it could be up to 40 different missions to fill that spacecraft, because the problem is they're using hypergolics. I don't mean hypergolics, I'm sorry. They're using cryogenic fuel, liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. Well, the first thing liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen do when they are in a confined space in a spacecraft is they begin to warm up and expand. So you have a lot of bleed off. You can't just fill the tank a tenth of the way and then fly another ship up and fill it another tenth of the way, because in the interval between when you have those flights going, some of that fuel is boiling off. So you have it 10% filled, and by the time you get another ship up there, it's down to 5% filled. So you're always trying to chase the loss, and you have to fly a lot of missions very fast to get it fueled properly. The 1960s lunar module went up with all of its fuel in place. It had everything it needed on board. And, the thinking is, at least Blue Origin's model will use hypergolic fuels, which do not boil off. So,
And just
you
to
know,
clarify this boiling off phenomenon, the problem
mhm,
is that when you're using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, they need to be stored at, I mean, it's not just cold temperatures, it's inconceivably cold temperatures that
it's
never occur
inconceivable.
in nature on planet Earth. It's like minus
That's exactly right.
280 degrees Celsius or something. It's like almost,
That's yeah.
so it's absurd.
Right. It's so cold that the environment of space, which in the shadowed portion of the Earth is minus 250 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know the Celsius conversion for that. And that is already too warm at minus 200 Fahrenheit for the hygienics that have to be
This is like it's like going to Wyoming in January or
exactly.
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So as it's burning, as it's boiling up there
Mhm.
because it's more than incredibly cold.
Right.
You're racing up to give it enough fuel, and you need that much fuel because it's a large, unwieldy object. I mean, why can't you just send up a massive rocket that has all the fuel on it? Is it just
Right.
that you get to a point of weight at which that becomes
Yeah, you can't
impracticable?
launch all that fuel, so you have to fuel it in Earth orbit because there isn't no rocket exists
Okay.
that can lift all that fuel. And the SpaceX Starship rocket that has flown a few times has 33 friggin' engines, which is amazing.
Wow.
And it is the most powerful rocket that's ever flown. I can't do the kilogram conversion, but the Saturn V rocket, which for a long time was the most powerful rocket that ever flew, produced 7.5 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. The Space
Wow.
System rocket that NASA is using for the Artemis program and has flown once on an uncrewed voyage, produces 8.8 million pounds of thrust. So that's a little bit more than the Saturn V. The Starship rocket produces 16 million pounds of thrust. So, it's more than twice what the Saturn V was, but that's still not remotely enough to haul up all that fuel. Even if you filled that rocket, even if there was nothing on board but fuel, you could still only fill the lunar craft, a quarter of the way up or an eighth of the way up.
Okay, and so in helping us to understand why there is this, and we'll get to the political. I think the political stuff is interesting as well between Elon and Trump, and
Right,
this billionaire philanthropist who's going to be running NASA, and then Jeff
right.
Bezos and all the egos and everything. But in order to basically understand why we're at something of a stalemate as to how to get up there, so we've got this problem with the Elon SpaceX plan,
Mhm.
which is it's giant and unwieldy and requires a lot of refueling. There are two alternative plans that you mentioned. There's a Lockheed Martin and a Blue
And
Origin, which is Jeff Bezos. Should we talk about Jeff Bezos's way of doing it?
well, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos get into, you should pardon the language, a pissing match all the time. About who has the better spacecraft, who has the bigger phallic rocket. And by the way, there is nothing in the world that looks as much like a penis as Blue Origin's suborbital rockets. It's almost like they went out of their way to reveal their id. Um,
Right. They have
so
they almost have a circumcised head on the top of the
They
rocket.
do have a circumcised head, yes.
Right.
And whoever designed it had no sense of irony. They didn't
Yeah.
realize what
Or a
they were
huge sense of irony.
doing. A huge sense of irony, one or the other. Um, but the fact is, he has not yet launched a functional space payload even into low Earth orbit. He has never done it. He has launched something into orbit just once on the New Glenn rocket, and that was basically just, a dummy payload that really couldn't do anything. He's never launched a satellite. That company
Right,
has
but
been
now you sound like Elon in being nitpicky about what the kind of payload was, because Elon originally tweeted that that Bezos had never launched a payload, and then when corrected,
right.
Elon went back and amended his tweet to say, "All right, functional payload." But isn't that a semantic difference? I mean, isn't like either you do the thing or you don't do the thing. Do we really
Right.
care whether he's carrying a whole bunch of Las Vegas pornography flyers or life-saving medicines? Either way, he got it into space, didn't he?
Yeah, well, I mean, he did get an object into orbit, but that is one flight with one object in orbit, and the Falcon 9 rocket has, I forget the latest number, but I think it's got 430 something launches, successful launches since 2010. So, there is no comparison
Okay.
between the flights that Elon has put on the board and the flights that Bezos has put on the board. And, SpaceX is clearly the superior of the two companies.
Does Bezos have a plausible moon plan, though?
He does, and they've been working on that for a while. They call it the Blue Moon lander, and it is a two-part ship, like the Lockheed Martin ship. Lockheed Martin, in order to get the lander built as quickly as possible, is using a lot of off-the-shelf parts. Lockheed Martin built the Orion spacecraft, the orbiter, the mothership for the Artemis program. And for the upper stage of the lunar lander, they're actually repurposing the Orion cockpit. They're just taking the same cockpit that's used in the orbiter and building a different skin around it. So basically, what they need for the upper stage is it's kind of off the shelf at this point. The lower stage, they are reaching out to at least 10 other aerospace companies and seeing if they can get a national collaboration going to put this spacecraft together quickly. And the thinking is that the leading candidate to build the bottom stage, the descent stage of the module, is Blue Origin, is Jeff Bezos' company.
Right, I see. And is there a reason why NASA can't do this? I mean, obviously, most people are aware that the space shuttle program was closed and NASA hasn't been doing, NASA has been initially having to pay the Russians to take them up to the International Space Station and then paying Elon Musk. What is the point of NASA in all this? G'day, humans! Well, if you've listened to this much of the episode, then you must enjoy it, presumably, unless you're just listening for masochistic reasons. So you should listen to the rest of it. And the way you do that is by subscribing to the premium feed, where you not only get to hear the rest of this delightful conversation, and trust me, it gets better than what you just heard, but you also get to hear no ads, zero ads. And previously, up until now, you had to go to the old Substack to do that and follow me on Substack and add one more platform to your life if you're not already on Substack. But here's the thing. We are now on Apple Premium Podcast as well. So with one click, Apple will just subscribe you up to the premium feed. You'll be able to listen to the rest of this conversation right now. So open up your Apple Podcasts, click the old Pay Old Zepsy button. That's probably what it's called, Pay Old Zepsy. And you click the button, and then you no longer have to be a free rider. You can feel like you're contributing to the mission of this show, which is really what we're all here for: better conversations, a freer, more freewheeling attitude towards the things that we can talk about, a way to steelman our opponents and to take the most gracious approach towards disagreement. That is what you're voting for when you vote for Uncomfortable Conversations by going into your Apple Podcasts and clicking subscribe. I love you. If you don't do that, that's fine. I'll see you the next free episode, I guess. Take care.